Yes, so this afternoon we continue. I fear we're never going to finish, but never mind, next time. I know tomorrow we have some time also, but I think I would rather go through each point more slowly than just zap through them and just in order to say we finished. So the next point is the previous one was the supreme accomplishment, or the supreme siddhi is a continuous decrease of disturbing emotions, and after that comes the sign of accomplishment is a continuous decrease of wishes and wants. Now, according to Buddhism, there are, many of you may have seen the picture of the wheel of life, where samsara, the round of birth and death and rebirth, redeath, is pictured as a wheel and divided into segments in accordance with the various rebirths which one can have, starting from the hell realms, the hungry spirits, the animals, humans, asuras, the titans, and the gods. But at the hub of the wheel are three animals, each biting each other's tail, so that they're continually going around. And as we know, the hub of the wheel is what turns the whole wheel around. Take away the hub and the wheel won't turn. And so these animals represent, first, rather unfairly, the pig, who represents ignorance, despite being an intelligent animal. That represents ignorance, meaning ignorance not of, the capital of Guatemala or quantum physics, but the ignorance of who we truly are and the true nature of reality. We don't see things as they really are. And so this basic ignorance, which is based on the idea of an ego as being who we really are, our identity with our ego. Because of that, automatically, we reach out for what seems to be pleasurable, desirable, and we resist and push away that which seems to be painful or unpleasurable. So we do this automatically. You are sitting there, and at first it's all very comfortable, but after I've been going on for an hour and a half, you'll all be shifting around, avoiding pain and seeking comfort. We do it all the time. And so this basic attraction towards pleasure and avoidance towards pain is underlined by our craving, our desires, our negative desires. Of course, there is the desire for enlightenment, there is the desire to serve others, but it doesn't mean that kind of desire. It means negative wants and wishes and endless craving. And then on the opposite side, the avoidance, the aversion, gives rise to anger, irritation, frustration, rage, and so forth. So the Buddha said that although anger, those actions of body, speech, and mind based on the root of anger or aversion are much, much more karmically negative, nonetheless, anger and aversion is relatively easy to eradicate compared with the root of craving, greed. And we can see why. Anger, aversion, irritation, frustration, depression, they make us feel bad. And the mind feels unhappy. And so we strive to overcome our anger, that root of anger in us. All over the world, east or west, people ask, how can I overcome my anger? Very few people ever ask, how can I overcome my greed? Why? because our greeds, if satisfied, we regard as a source of happiness. And so we don't really want to get rid of our greeds. What we want is to satisfy them. But as the Buddha said, greed is like salty water. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. And we can see this, of course, in our modern day society very clearly. When I lived in the... I think this is a very important thing for you yoga people to understand, you know. I mean, you do understand it, but I'm pushing it so that you'll understand it even more. Not the swamis, of course. I mean, the rest of you over there. When I lived in the cave, outside of the cave there was a flat area, a kind of patio, which was made of pressed earth. But because when it snowed or when it rained, it got very muddy, I decided to put down flat stones so that I could walk in it, make a kind of pavement. So I gathered the stones, and then so there was this flat earth, and then from time to time there were these little clusters of very pretty little pink flowers with a kind of yellow or blue center, very sweet. And there would be a cluster here and then a little cluster there and a little cluster somewhere else. So I thought, well, they're very cute, but we have to put down this pavement, so I have to pull them up. So I got a cluster and I pulled. And then I pulled and I pulled, and they would not come up. So then I got, what's it called, a thing for digging the earth. And I started digging down to get to the roots. And I dug, and then I could see the roots went down, and then they went along. In the end, to cut a story short, I discovered that these roots of these sweet little harmless-looking flowers were underlying the whole of the patio and then down. And the roots were this thick. I mean, there was huge underground network of thick roots. And I thought, this is like craving. This is like desire. Looks very harmless, even attractive. But it undermines the whole of our psyche, which is why it is so hard to uproot. And why the Buddha said that the cause of suffering is desire. So this little sentence here about reducing our wishes and wants is much more profound than it appears at first. And is why I think Atishy said that it is the supreme sign of really getting somewhere spiritually, is when our desires, here again I repeat, when we say desire, we don't mean all desire. The desire for walking the path, the desire for practice, the desire for enlightenment, the desire to benefit others. This is actually in Sanskrit and in Tibetan, it's a different word. And it doesn't mean that desire, right? Not a wholesome desire. This means unwholesome desire. And this unwholesome desire permeates our psyche. Right from the start, you see it with little babies, and it goes on and on and on. So therefore, a sign that maybe something is percolating through is the fact that we naturally, not through suppression, but naturally have fewer wants and wishes. the idea of renunciation is a very important one on the spiritual path. All religions emphasize, well, almost all religions, almost all religions emphasize the need for renunciation. And so we also, I feel, need to understand what it means. In Tibetan, it's the word ngechung, which means to really go forth, to really emerge from something. And sometimes when one says the word, I mean, there are certain words which are like triggers for many people in the West because of the way it's the associations. One is renunciation, another is surrender, and so forth. And immediately, but to my mind, renunciation is not something which is painful. Because if we give up something which we really, really are attached to, maybe we haven't really renounced it. Although I have to say the great renunciation of my life when I became a Buddhist as a teenager was Elvis Presley. That was a renunciation, I have to admit. But in general, it's more like if we have small children and they have a favorite toy, like a teddy bear, and we take that teddy bear away from them saying, no, you don't need to play with teddy bears anymore. You should give up this childish occupations. That child will feel bereft. It will be so upset because it's very attached to its teddy bear or whatever toy. It's not ready to let it go. But as the child gets older, then of itself it loses interest in that teddy. It is no longer that attachment has just dropped away. So that now it is interested in other things, other toys or other interests. But if you took the teddy away now, it wouldn't even notice. Likewise, if we pull leaves when the tree is in full bloom, then there is a resistance from those leaves. But come the autumn, come the fall, those leaves are ready to drop for themselves. It doesn't cause pain to the tree. The tree has outgrown those leaves. It's going to be quiet and then grow new leaves. And so likewise, our renunciation should be a matter of internal growth. The Buddha called us ordinary people the childish. And the whole path was about maturing, about growing up. Because, if you have small children, I mean, all of those who are parents, they know. If a child gets what it wants, it's happy, happy, happy. And if it is in any way thwarted or frustrated, then it is enraged. So upset, so absolutely showering of tears. But we know this is just a child. Children are like that. They cannot manage their emotions. It's natural for a child to be happy when something goes right and be totally distressed when something goes wrong. Fine. But the problem is that meantime, we grow up, we get older, outwardly, we mature and then age, but inside, we are still infants. Something happens which pleases us, happy, happy, happy. Something goes wrong, inside, outside, of course, you have to be calm. So the point is that we have to really look at our minds to see not only how we are in a beautiful environment when everyone is friendly and kind and everything goes how we would wish it to go, but how we respond in difficult situations also. We'll do this later in the text if we get to it. So one of the tests is that we are no longer so interested, genuinely, in many of the things which previously had seemed so desirable, that we really wanted so much. Now, if we get them, that's nice. But if we don't get them, that's also nice. Really doesn't matter. It's not that we all have to, renounce the whole world and go and live in Himalayas. That's not the point at all. The point is, it's not how much we possess. I mean, really, honestly, things themselves are innocent. It's not the things which are the problem. It's our attachment to those things. Our desire for those things. That's the problem. It's in here. It's not out there. So, therefore, it's very important to really see how attached we are to our possessions. Do we possess our possessions, or do our possessions possess us? This is the question. And in this way, our wishes and our wants become simplified. It's very important if you are wanting to lead some kind of real dharmic life, some real spiritual life out in the world, not here in the ashram, to simplify the life. To simplify your lives and to cultivate contentment. Instead of thinking always what we don't have, to really focus on what we do have. And be grateful and appreciative and content. Contentment nowadays in our modern society is really either ignored completely or derided, because if we're all content, we won't buy. And then they think the whole economy will collapse. So our advertising agencies are just geared to make us have all these artificial wishes and wants. So we need to discriminate, obviously, between our needs, which are valid, and our greeds, which are endless. So as we naturally begin to find, actually, I don't really need that. Actually, I don't really want that. And lose interest in so much of what is promoted as being essential for a good life. As we begin to lose interest in that, then that shows that something else of deeper interest is taking over. So this whole question of our greed, our greedy mind, which is endless, it's like a big black hole inside, which never ever can be fulfilled by things, or, to be quite honest, by people. We should enter into relationships as a whole, as an integrated human being, not out of need, not out of a sense of incompletion. When we do that, then we put an incredible burden on the other person, which is why so many relationships go sour. But if we enter into relationships from a sense of inner wholeness, then that's a very mature relationship based on mutual respect rather than grasping and attachment and despair. So this whole question of our wishes and wants seem very innocent. But the root goes down very, very deep in our psyche. And in order to really, really begin to show the fruits of our practice, we have to examine whether or not at least some of this is being gradually uncovered and uprooted. Because if we're just as greedy and grasping and selfish as ever, what's the point? So, along with that, the Supreme, now he's going into what are called the 6 paramita. Paramita are, it means to go beyond. And there are these 6 paramita, which are regarded as the qualities needed to be cultivated in order to attain Buddhahood. It's not just meditation. Many qualities, of course, are needed for the spiritual life, but from those, these 6 were extracted. And the first is generosity. Generosity or giving is a very important quality. Normally, we like to accumulate. So therefore, it's very important to go in the other direction towards open-handedness, open-heartedness, and sharing, as you all know. When I live in India, and not so far from us is a very small little ashram made of mud brick. And there lived there, he has passed away now, but at that time there lived there this old Swami who actually was from Kerala and Tamil Nadu. He was from Tamil Nadu. He was a direct disciple of Ramana Maharshi when he was young. But he himself was much more of a bhakta. He was very devotional, very, very sweet man. His name was Ramananda. And he was, he lived very, very simply, but he had a number of chela, a number of students from the Punjab who were quite wealthy. And in those days, not much was imported into India of foreign goods. So anything which people would bring from abroad was considered very, very precious. And so his students would bring him all these nice things from abroad and from elsewhere, and to present to him. And he would look at it, and he would be so pleased, and he would examine it and look at it and show his friends. And he would be so happy to have it and so grateful. And then you could see in his mind was thinking, wow, this is lovely. Who can I give it to? Who would like it? And next thing he had said, here, you come. Would you like this? This is for you. And so it was like his fingers weren't sticky. Nothing stuck there. They just slid off. He took it. He loved it. It wasn't he just said, well, I'm beyond these things. Don't bring me these trifles. When people gave him something, he was delighted. But his delight was also in knowing that somebody else would enjoy that. He didn't need it. So that quality of open-hearted generosity is a very, very beautiful quality also for dissolving our ego. Because the ego says more, more, more. and this ability to let go. Actually, if I had to say, in Buddhism there was a mantra, I would say it's not Om Mani Padme Hung, it's let go, let go, let go. Om, let go, Hung Pe. Because our nature is to cling. We are not really conscious of that until we try to let go. So therefore the Buddha made it easy for us by starting with the quality of generosity, of training ourselves to let go, to share with others, not just things, but our time, our help. All of you karma yogis, you are practicing generosity because you are giving your time, you are giving your skills for the sake of others. And this is a very, very important quality of the heart and the hands. To be generous. Even if we cannot be too ethical, even if we're hopeless at meditation, even if our wisdom is this big, we can be kind. We can be generous. The Dalai Lama often says, my religion is kindness. And when one meets him, one sees that. When only he has, his eyes just beam kindness. And this kindness comes along with this open, generous heart. The generous heart leads to generous hands. So this is a very important quality on the spiritual path. The second part, I am trying to get through this. The second part is the supreme ethical conduct is to pacify one's own mind. So again, along with being open and generous and delighting in sharing with others, is the discipline of ethics. Now, in general, in Buddhism, there are, the time of taking refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, there are 5 ethical precepts which are accepted by lay people. And so this is universal in the whole Buddhist world. And these ethical precepts are not to take life. That means any life, not just human life, but animals, fish, insects, anything which has consciousness. Because to each being, their own life is most dear, as we know. I mean, any animal. Why do animals in the wild fear human beings? Because they know human beings are going to harm them. Which is an awful reputation for human beings to have. And all the animal kingdom know it. Watch out for that one. Truly. It's very sad. Anyway, we won't go into it. But, I mean, so the first precept is not to take life. The second precept is not to take that which is not given. So that's like stealing. It means that, again, people can feel safe with us. We're not going to hurt them, and we are not going to take their possessions. Nobody likes people who take our possessions. That includes, of course, borrowing. Books, DVDs, CDs, and so forth. Somehow or other, when they leave our possession, they take wings and fly. They rarely fly home. So we should be scrupulous. If we borrow something, we give it back. and we give it back in as good a condition as we borrowed it. We have that responsibility for others' possessions, because just as we don't really appreciate people taking from us and not returning, so other people are exactly the same. We have that responsibility. The third precept is against sexual misconduct. And again, basically, for lay people, it means that one should not use one's sexual energies in any way that could cause any harm to other beings. That we are responsible for our sexuality. That we do not exploit others or engage in any relations which could possibly cause harm that we can see. So again, it's a sense of living in this world harmlessly. We have to take responsibility for our actions. If we can't help, at least we don't harm. The fourth precept is about speech, because we, influence people a lot about speech. Our speech has to be truthful, but not just truthful, it should be kind. And we should not slander or be abusive or divisive or gossip. Idle speech. So in other words, again, our speech should be responsible, because people are very much harmed. Even if they are not physically abused, they can be verbally abused. And we have we have the perversity to hold in our hearts the harsh speech rather than the kind speech which we receive. Many, many people hold deep traumas of verbal abuse from their childhood. Mothers scolding their children and saying some really awful things, which in their heart they don't mean, but they just say it because they're irritated and fed up. But that child absorbs it into their heart. They never let it go. So we should be very responsible with our speech. Especially, couples and people in close relationships with their children, their parents, their partners, in their workplace. How do you sound to others? Really? Many people, if you play them a recording of their voices, don't recognize themselves. We don't hear ourselves. People who have been quarreling, they say, but all I said was da 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 da. But it's not what they said, it's how they said it. So again, we need to be responsible for our speech. And then lastly, in these precepts, to keep the mind clear. So therefore also the avoidance of alcohol, drugs, anything which will influence the mind. Because as we all know, so much abuse and crime and destruction is caused through people being under the influence of alcohol and drugs. We all know this. So these are the basic precepts. And when Buddhists hear ethics, they think of these precepts. But Atishy says, the supreme ethical conduct is to pacify one's mind. So these precepts are dealing with our body, our actions, and our speech. But Atishy pushes all that aside and goes to the very point, which is our mind. Why do we steal? Why do we destroy life? Why do we lie or utter abusive speech? Why are we sexually abusive to others or make use of others for our own satisfaction? Why? Because of our mental intention and the negative emotions which disturb our mind. The body is not going to act if the mind doesn't tell it to. We are not going to say a word if the mind has not the intention to speak. So therefore, how our actions and speech develop depends on the mind, the instructions gathered from the mind. Everything which we say and do has an intention behind it. It might be so quick that we don't notice it, but it's always there. And so also the Buddha said that karma is intention. It's not what we do, but it's why we do it. What are the mental underpinnings of that action? Are they conjoined with greed, anger, ignorance, jealousy, and so forth? Or with kindness, generosity, compassion, and so forth? So the underlying intentions in the mind are what create the karma, not just the action itself. And so, therefore, if we have a peaceful mind, a calm, peaceful mind, then we will not act unethically. People who are angry, people who do bad things, people who create problems for others do not have peaceful minds. I mean, they do not. And because of their own inner disturbance, they therefore act outwardly to cause problems for other people. But people whose minds are settled and centered and peaceful, their actions, their speech will also be peaceful. So, if we really want to lead a perfectly ethical life, again, it comes back to the mind. It's not a matter of constraint and restraint. And of course, even the precepts, they are not commandments. They are called actually rules of training. We are training ourselves to live as a perfected being would live. As someone who is genuinely spiritual advanced would never dream of taking the life of others, would never dream of taking what is not given, and so forth. It wouldn't come into their mind to do such a thing. So therefore, these precepts are helping us to act as if we were enlightened, as if we really were spiritual beings. So therefore, the basis of this, again, is on having a peaceful mind. If our mind is peaceful, as I say, our actions will be peaceful, our speech will be peaceful, without a sense of being held tight. Like, you know, in the olden days, women used to wear these corsets, you know, in order to get the right shape. And that's why they were always fainting all over the place. I mean, they could hardly breathe, right? And they were constrained. Of course, they looked beautiful. Perfect figure, everyone to admire. But, I mean, the minute they got home, I'm sure they unlaced the whole thing. So our spiritual discipline should not be like that. It shouldn't be something which constrains us what we really want to do, and then we have to stop ourselves because Guruji says don't. It should come from inside. us that we naturally don't even want to do these things. Why would we want to take the life of another being? Why would we want to abuse others in order to gain our own satisfaction? We wouldn't want to. But that comes from having a mind which is settled and peaceful. A peaceful mind brings a peaceful world. I mean, obviously, if everybody's mind was peaceful, we wouldn't have the world we have. And even if everyone kept these 5 precepts, then we wouldn't have the world we have. Even the Buddhist world. So it all comes back again to the mind. The mind is the key. If the mind is centered and conscious and aware and peaceful and clear, then the body and the speech just naturally flow from that. Of course. How could they not? So then the supreme patience is to take the lowest place. This is a very important precept in the Lojong teachings. The Lojong, as I said, means mind training. And it is all about, well, it has 2 things. One thing is how to overcome the ego. And the other, which goes with it, is taking all the difficulties and problems and challenges that we meet in life and using it as the path. I think he deals with that later. Towards the bottom it says inspiration is enemies, hindrances, disease and suffering. So that is to do with the fact that when difficulties come on in our life, challenges come to us, instead of seeing that as an obstacle, we recognize that as an opportunity to develop. So these 2 of putting ourselves at the lowest and taking difficulties and problems, sickness and so forth as the path, using it as the path, is the crux of the whole Lojong teachings. And there are many, many texts on how to do this. But I think it's very important. We will stop here and discuss this. The supreme patience is to take the lowest place. How are we doing for time? Okay. Because I want some questions, so I'm looking at the time. One time, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he's very fascinated by science, especially quantum physics and neuroscientists and all this sort of thing. And so every year he holds what is called the Mind Life Conferences, where top scientists, psychologists, and so forth come together as a panel to discuss the interrelation of the spiritual life and science. And so one time there was this gathering of these neuroscientists and psychologists and so forth. And His Holiness was discussing this whole question of putting ourselves lowest and the challenges of the self-cherishing mind, which is always the big no-no, our endless self-concern and the basic selfish attitude which we have, that ourselves are most important and other people are there in a way just to help us. So this self-cherishing mind, he was explaining about this and how we are so proud of ourselves and how we need to put ourselves at the bottom. And so one of the scientists said, yes, but what about low self-esteem and self-hatred? And His Holiness looked completely blank and said, what? And he said, low self-esteem, people who don't like themselves. So then His Holiness turned to his translator and had a little discussion with him. What's this guy talking about? And then he said, "Oh, I think very rare, very rare." And so the scientist turned to his very eminent colleagues and said, "Whoever suffers from low self-esteem and self-hatred?" And everyone put up their hand. And so this was a big breakthrough for His Holiness. Because in general, and on the whole, traditional Tibetans, the ones coming from Tibet, felt good about themselves. Even lay people knew they had Buddha nature. And this was what made them such extraordinary refugees, was that although they had lost everything and had seen family members and loved ones killed and carried away to prisons right in front of them, and had gone through months and months of the trauma of trying to escape out of Tibet into the difficulties of living in India. But they were still so cheerful, and they had still that sense of inner confidence. Because not so much the modern generation with their new ideas and sense of dislocation, but the old ones from Tibet, they had a very strong sense of inner well-being, which even without a trauma, which they had all experienced, it was there inside them. This sense of, I don't know, it's a very, you see it in the old ones, there's not many left anymore, but a very strong sense of impregnable confidence. So I don't think there is a word in Tibetan for low self-esteem. There's lots of word for pride, but the idea of not liking yourself is very alien. For them, the problem is liking yourself too much. And so therefore, these Lojong texts are a lot about putting oneself, and also we have to remember, putting oneself down. We have to remember that these texts were written by very eminent monk scholars who, of course, were always raised up and basically intended for other monk scholars likewise raised up. So it was very good for them to hear about putting themselves down. But I think in our modern world, we have to express this slightly differently. I mean, basically what it means is that we should, when we meet others especially, that we should be the least important in our mind. Many people, when they meet other people, their first concern is, what are they thinking about me? Drop it. Who cares? The important thing is that oneself should be concerned that the other person, whoever, should be well and happy. Not thinking about oneself, not concerned with oneself. Only concerned that that person should be happy. That's all. It's not a matter of high or low. It's a matter of getting out the way. Because so often when if people meet, then they block the view of the other person because they're only seeing the other person only from their point of view and judging them from what they're going to be judging me, which is ridiculous. So the important thing, therefore, is to get away, stand aside inwardly, and just be there with that person. I will quote His Holiness the Dalai Lama again because His Holiness is such an exemplar of what we are talking about, and most of you have heard of him at least. When His Holiness meets anyone, even, like people, maybe hundreds line up, and then he goes along and he smiles at everybody and just goes by. And from time to time, he will stop and take somebody's hand and talk to them for a few seconds. And when he does that, he looks straight in that person's eyes. And the person concerned invariably dissolves when he moves on. Because when they look into His Holiness's eyes, they see such total intelligence. He's a very learned scholar, actually. But compassion and non-judgmental love. Absolutely accepting that person as they truly are and not under the persona which we wear. So that even journalists, hardened journalists who go in to interview His Holiness come out in tears. Because often His Holiness is much more interested in them and is asking them all the questions, and you see him photographed with these politicians or some sort of high church people who are very stiff on either side, and His Holiness is smiling away. And you can see that they feel very uncomfortable because His Holiness is not interested in who they think they are as far as their worldly persona is concerned. He's looking straight through to the person behind all that. And in a way they feel naked and therefore they don't know what to do. But ordinary people just love it. Because they know that even as he sees them with love and total acceptance. He's not judging. And so in this way, even in 1 second, he can transform somebody's life. Just to meet and be accepted without judgment. So this is really what he's meaning when he says lowest. It doesn't mean that we have to think, oh, me, I'm ever so humble. Oh, I'm nobody. Oh, I'm useless. Oh, I'm the worst person. Oh, yoga, I'll never get it. I'm so stupid. Doesn't mean that. Because in Buddhism, pride is thinking we're better than others, thinking we're as good as others, or thinking we're inferior to others. Because all of it has me in the center. The ego is it's very important to realize that the ego is perfectly happy to be miserable. Really. Because if we are sad, if we think ourselves stupid, if we think ourselves hopeless, if we think ourselves inferior to everyone, that is still me. That is not being egoless. We know this. People who have psychiatric problems are totally absorbed in themselves. This is why psychiatrists and psychotherapists are so popular. You lie there and you talk about yourself. Me, 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 me. My hard childhood. My hard this. My this, and this. Even if you're saying how useless you are, how you've always failed, how nothing ever goes right, nobody loves you, it's still me, 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 me. Isn't it? That is not what is meant by being egoless. Being egoless means we forget ourselves. We are open towards all others. Others are more important, more interesting. more deserving of love. But that does not mean that we do not also love ourselves. This is a very important thing. When we're dealing with the ego, Buddhism, of course, as I said, is very hard on the ego. But we have to recognize that until we are at a very advanced level, we are taking our ego with us, and it is the ego that is actually walking the path. The nature of the mind, our intrinsic nature, our divine nature, doesn't need to learn about ethics and generosity and compassion and all these things. That's its very nature. What needs to learn? How to be kind, how to be disciplined, how to think of others beyond itself. The ego. It's the ego that's walking the path. So the ego goes either way. The ego in the sense of I. It can go either way. It can be a helper on the path, or it can be an obstacle for us on the path. So what we need first, and all this talk about the tamed mind, the peaceful mind, it's not talking about our intrinsic nature. It's talking about our ordinary surface mind. So what we need first is a healthy, balanced sense of self in order to walk the path towards the dissolution of the self. Therefore, in Buddhism, the meditations on loving kindness and compassion and so forth first are directed towards oneself. May I be well and happy. May I be free from suffering. Then towards others. And it was interesting that recently I read an article, I'll finish here, by Thubten Jinpa, who, yes, but I want some questions. Thubten Jinpa is a great scholar, and he used to be, and he still is when he can, the Dalai Lama's translator. He is always the best one the Dalai Lama ever had. And very lovely man. Anyway, he has started an institute for teaching compassion. They do courses, a 5-week course on how to learn compassion and loving kindness. And he said that, traditionally you start with yourself, giving yourself compassion, giving yourself loving kindness. But he has found there's so much resistance in the West. He was so surprised that people find it very, very hard to give loving kindness to themselves. So now they have changed it in his program that first people give loving kindness to people they love. That they can do. They can think of somebody they love and wish them to be well and happy. Then when they get the idea of how that sense of well-being from wishing others to be well and happy, then they teach them how to bring it in and wish themselves well and happy. This is an important point. If we have a limb, like an arm, which is in pain, then we have to protect that arm. We can't use it much, and we have to protect it. We have to, if somebody hits it, it hurts a lot. And we're always thinking about it because it's in pain. But when the arm is healed and healthy, then not only is it very useful, but we're not thinking about it. How many of you sit all day long thinking about your arm? We use our arm, but we're not particularly aware of it. And if somebody hits it accidentally, it doesn't hurt, So just a slap. So what? So this is very like the ego. While our ego is hurting, we are very concerned with me the whole time because we're in pain. Once the ego is healthy and balanced, we don't think about it. We're not thinking about me. we're thinking about others. And then that healthy sense of I will walk the path to its own transcendence. So therefore it's very important when he talks about taking the lowest place. It means that just that our concern with ourselves the whole time should just, evaporate. And our main concern should be with the happiness and well-being of others. And this is one of the things which, of course, in an environment like this, you're all learning how to be of service to others. In being of service to others, then one's self-concern begins to lessen. So we leave it there for now. Are there any questions?
Other than meditation, are there any good techniques to naturally let go of cravings and wants?
Well, one of the things was mentioned here, which is generosity, of being of service to others and thinking of others' happiness and the delight in others' happiness, instead of always thinking what's in it for me. It's a slow process, but of course, as we learn to be more content, as we learn to want to share and take more joy in giving and than receiving, slowly it begins, the balance begins to shift. So meditation is always important because that is dealing with the mind and we begin to become more conscious of our intentions. But that definitely should then percolate through to our speech and our actions, isn't it? Right? We become more generous, more content, more happy to share with others, more concerned with others' joys than with our own, isn't it? Not just meditation. This is what I'm saying. These paramita are in Mahayana Buddhism, the path to Buddhahood. And I mean, meditation is only one of those things. Generosity, ethics, patience, and so forth. These are also very important qualities needed on the path.
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
I hope I'm not practicing greed. I have two questions. One was sort of what this gentleman asked was like practical tools, because in concept it's great, and then I go out into the world and I try and pray for the willingness to, I guess, become aware when I can practice this principle, but what some other tools you use to create that willingness. And then my second question is, if you experience an obsession of the mind or an addiction that's more than average, if there's sort of like any extra focus or extra tips to help that.
I more and more feel that the essence of the whole point is to become more mindful and aware. That we get caught up in our attachments and obsessions and our unskillful habitual patterning because we are not really conscious of that happening. So it's very important to become more and more aware of what is actually happening in us while it is happening. And then that which is skillful, we can encourage. And that which is unskillful, we can try to just drop or transform. That is the underpinning for everything, that we are so unconscious of so much that we do and say and think. And so we need to wake up, we need to become more aware. As we become more aware, we become more in control. Because so often we recognize we are not the masters of our own minds, we're the slaves of our minds. And so we have to develop the ability to take control of our own mind. And really, this is not something just in meditation, although meditation is very important, but also throughout the day. I mean, Atishy says to watch the mind at all times, even if we can't do it at all times, as much as possible, to be conscious. What is the mind doing? And when unskillful states arise, to catch it as soon as possible. The sooner we catch it, the better. In fact, if we can catch it in the moment of arising, then of itself it will transform into a very powerful wisdom energy. But normally we cannot do that, because by the time we've caught on that we're grasping, or that we are angry and irritated or whatever, it's way down the road. But even then, recognizing that, naming that, seeing that that really is not the direction we want to go in, and dropping it is very important. And we can do it, but we have to make that determination. Every day, I'm going to use this day to live my life, to benefit others, and to learn how to deal skillfully with my mind. And at night, we can look back on that day. What did we do that day? Before going to sleep, you can look back on the highlights of the day. When things come up, how did we deal with it? If we dealt with it skillfully, then we're happy, good, let's do more of that. If it was not what we would have wanted, then, well, next time I'll try to do better. Now the new year is coming, so it's good to look back over last year. What did we do with last year? How have we developed since last time we were, celebrating a new year coming in? And every month, every week, every day, we can ask ourselves, in a kind way, how are we doing? We don't have to keep making the mistakes over and over and over. We can learn new habits, which is the good news in neuroscience now, that actually we can change even our neural pathways. Anyway, go.
So you spoke of the wheel of life, and I apologize if I missed this, but you spoke of the pig who represented ignorance. I don't know if you spoke of the other two animals.
Oh, sorry. The snake represents anger, and the rooster represents greed. And they're all in a circle biting each other's tails. So one leads on to the other, endlessly revolving around.
First of all, I want to thank you for the depth and clarity of your discussion. It was just really, really inspiring. So thank you very much. I have a question about mindfulness meditation. First of all, I want to thank you for the depth and clarity of your discussion. It was just really, really inspiring. So thank you very much. I have a question about mindfulness meditation versus concentrative meditation. I was trained, and I think most of us here at Shivananda do a sort of a concentrative meditation. And in my tradition, we were taught to actually let the thoughts go. So when they come up, don't trace them back, but just come back to your mantra. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about the differences. Thank you.
Well, concentration is also a kind of mindfulness, but it's normally that which is undertaken while one is doing formal meditation. In Buddhist meditation, as in Hindu meditation, there are many, many different techniques. Also in Buddhism, when thoughts arise, we just ignore them in general and concentrate. The first thing is to get the mind peaceful and concentrated. And to, how can I say, to simplify it. There's the gross mind, which is our ordinary, like the ocean. Right, it's this the waves of the mind which run chattering through our mind the whole time, right? That's our gross conceptual thinking mind, the thinking mind. Now, the thinking mind cannot meditate. In order to meditate, we have to bring up something which we could call here the subtle mind. The subtle mind is the attention, the ability to step back from the thinking mind and to focus on the object of meditation, whether the breath or the mantra or the mind itself. That is a whole other level of mind. It's not the thinking mind. The thinking mind isn't looking at itself. There is another level of mind which is able to observe, right, and to be concentrated. And that's what we're developing when we do concentration. We're developing that ability to have that level of consciousness which is very clear and focused and one-pointed. And then behind that is the very subtle mind, which is the nature of the mind, which is, as I say, compared to the sky, because it's not something which we can grasp onto. It has no center, it has no circumference. It's all-pervading. Clarity, luminosity, and awareness, but also empty in its nature in that you can't hold it like space. And it's what connects us all. Whereas all the other levels of our consciousness have a subject-object dichotomy. They are dualistic by their nature. The nature of the mind is non-dualistic and unthinkable, unspeakable, but realizable. Right. So we're dealing basically with the second level of the mind, this quality of being able to witness, to observe. And so this is developed in concentration. Right? So first you have to learn how to get that quality of mind which observes without being, as it were, involved. Right? So in order to develop that, we use the breath or mantra or whatever is the object of the meditation. That doesn't really matter so much. What matters is that we are able to hone this ability of the mind to observe. And then, and the point is that this consciousness can only happen now. The reason why the breath is always a skillful object of meditation is because we cannot breathe in the past or the future. We only breathe now. So if we are completely focused, resting, knowing the breath as it comes in and out, we are present. Because our egoistic mind hates being present. It loves to dwell in the past, in all our memories, or in the future, in all our hopes and fears and fantasies. But the one place it never wants to be is right now. If we think we are present, we're actually just thinking about being present. It's very hard to be nakedly present. And this is what we are trying to do by developing these powers of concentration and then that ability to know in the moment, to bring that increasingly into our daily life. That is what in Buddhism is called mindfulness.
I'm here with my sons, and as we've talked about things over the past few days, they keep asking me, should you have compassion for Hitler, for Pol Pot,
absolutely.
for Coney? So how do we
totally.
deal with, what do Buddhist teachings say about how to confront, say, the head of ISIS or some of the evil people?
Would you want their mind?
No.
Then, imagine having a mind like that. Isn't that worthy of compassion?
I say yes.
Then.
They say no.
Yes, it is.
And how does one fight it?
No, you don't fight it in that sense. I mean, the point is that really, if you look at you think what it must be like to have been Hitler or Pol Pot or any of these people. I mean, you wouldn't want it in a million years. Apart from the terrible karma that they're making, would you want that mind? Absolutely. How sad. You know, a friend of mine, he was teaching, he was Jewish, and he was teaching a course on loving kindness. And one of the people there, his family had perished during the Holocaust. So he said, well, I will have compassion and loving kindness for everyone, but not Hitler. And so the teacher said, yes, sorry, Hitler. No. Yes. No. So he got up and he left. And then he was driving off, and then after an hour or so, he called up and he said, not Hitler. Sorry, Hitler. And then another hour, are you sure Hitler? Yep, Hitler. And then, okay, Hitler. And he came back. Love and compassion is infinite. It is completely without any, what's the word, it's unconditioned. It's unconditioned. It's not loving and having compassion for those people we like and no compassion for the people we don't like. It's totally unconditional. It's like the sky. It pervades everywhere. It's like the sun shining. The sun doesn't shine on the goodies and close off for the baddies. You know, that's our preconception. Even Hitler has Buddha nature. Even Hitler eventually will become a Buddha. Might take him a long time. He will get there. Everybody gets there.
Hi, thank you very much for sharing your insight. I think one of the things that resonated the most with me about that, of the talks that you've given so far, is yesterday, or it could have been this morning, you talked about if in order to be miserable, focus exclusively on yourself. In order to be really happy, focus exclusively on other people and other people's happiness. And I'm wondering if you could provide some guidance around how to find a balance to focus on other people's happiness while still giving yourself compassion, and still not focusing on other people's happiness at the expense of your own happiness.
Well, as I said, you know, in traditional Buddhist teachings, when we develop loving kindness and compassion, empathetic joy and equanimity, we start with ourselves. And as I said, we have to, one of our responsibilities is to heal our own sense of self. Because if we don't heal our sense of self and we are hurting, our sense of self is unhealthy and hurting, as I said, then we get preoccupied with me. Or we try to help others as a way of not looking at our own problems. And that's not what it means. It means that if we are really very healthy inside and balanced, then we don't have to worry so much about ourselves. We're okay. So until we are okay, then we have to really practice not only, you know, our meditation, but also giving loving kindness to ourselves. Loving kindness to ourselves, then loving kindness to those that we love. Loving kindness means really, really wishing others to be well and happy. And how wonderful that would be. And then to those to whom we feel quite neutral, people that we know but we don't think about one way or the other, the postman type of thing. And then those who cause us problems, who we really don't like or who are difficult for us to have to deal with, really wishing that they should be well and happy, and how nice that would be. But we start with ourselves, right? I mean, because we have to be there to help all sentient beings, all conscious beings, and we are a sentient being. And we are the sentient being we're responsible for. So, therefore, of course we have to take care of ourselves. How can we take care of others if we don't take care of ourselves? I mean, that's not being selfish, that's being sensible. Right? But it doesn't mean that we end up being self-absorbed. This is why we need the balance of helping ourselves, but part of that help is by helping others. Right? Because our culture is very much now focused just on our own hedonic sense of happiness and not much concern for the others. So it helps us to heal also to give as much as possible our joy in making others happy. And if making others happy gives us joy, then that also heals ourselves at the same time.
Last night you had described your dream of the prison and trying to escape the prison and escaping the cycle of rebirth, and that you could only do that when you're doing it for somebody else. And so could you just explain how seeking enlightenment is for someone else when you're seeking the enlightenment?
Well, as I say, I mean, from a Mahayana Buddhist point of view, the whole reason for wanting enlightenment is in order to be in a position to liberate others, to help others also escape, not just oneself. And this has practical applications. For example, I mean, first of all, in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, before doing any practice, we say we are doing this practice in order to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings, right? So that sets our motivation. It's not just so I will feel better, but that therefore, ultimately, one will be able to be of benefit and genuine help to everybody. It's like if you're a doctor, you go into medical college, you study for years and years and years to get all this skill and knowledge. Well, either you do that so that should you get sick, you'll be able to cure yourself, or you do it because you want to benefit others who are sick, isn't it? Right?
Thank you. And do you know anybody who's living like a regular life that's found enlightenment?
It all depends what you mean by enlightenment, my dear. It's a very loose word which we throw around happily. If you mean enlightenment, capital letters, glowing lights, it's probably quite rare. But genuine realizations and spiritual fulfillment, there are many, many people. There are everywhere. And not just monks and nuns and swamis. Quite ordinary people. Certainly in the Tibetan tradition, people who... you are judged by how you die in the Tibetan tradition. In the Tibetan tradition, in one way, your whole life is a preparation for death, because that is regarded as the time when you can make... if you make that transition consciously, then it's a very... powerful way to become liberated at the time of death. So how people die is a reflection of how they have lived in many cases. So Tibetans Tibetan great practitioners die magnificently. They're very good at it. And they stay in meditation for days and weeks and so forth. And also they can some very advanced practitioners dissolve their bodies into rainbows and leave nothing behind except their hair and their nails. And often what I was going to say is that ones who get what is called the rainbow body, which is considered the most advanced indication of practice, when their whole bodies just dissolve into rainbows and they leave nothing, are often ordinary people that often people didn't even know they had a practice. Norbu down the road there. He gets sick. He said, "Leave me, don't disturb me for a week." And then at some point out of his hut, people see these rainbows coming. When they open the door, they're just his clothing and his nails and his hair. Hair and nails, because hair and nails are dead. Right? That's why we can cut our hair and our nails. And so it's very difficult to transmute those. But the rest gets turned into energy source. So, yes, many famous practitioners were married. They had children. And it's not a matter of your outer status, it's a matter of your inner mind. But it takes... if you want to become a great musician, if you want to become a footballer or a baseball player or anything, you have to devote your life to it. I mean, you know, if you want to be a super professional golfer, you have to give everything to it. That's the center of your life. And so if one really wants to gain spiritual realizations and really transform the mind, one has to put the Dharma in the center of one's life. Not just, you know, the odd weekend when one can afford it. It has to be everything which we do. Raising your family, going to work, going backwards and forwards, everybody you meet, everything we do has to become the spiritual practice. Our mind has to be conscious, has to be aware, has to be present. Then it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, naturally it will be leading on the path. Otherwise, if we just do it, you know, like half an hour in the morning and evening and the rest of the day our minds are wild, nothing's going to change. So, yeah, you know, it's not a matter of your outer status. It's a matter of what you're doing with the mind, moment to moment to moment.
This is just so beautiful. I'm wondering if there's anything that... Yes?
I'm looking at the time.
Is there time for one more or no?
Okay. Yes.
What do the teachings have to say about the evolution of our humanity? Will we see a day of peace? Is that coming? I mean, is there anything about that?
I mean, I think both Hindu and Buddhism see this as the Kali Yuga. And so the idea is we're going downwards. Personally, I don't know. I mean, so the idea is basically, you know, right now we're on a downward slope. The greed has grown more, aggression has grown more, and egoism has grown more. This is the idea. But I think that, you know, we have a choice. And moment to moment, we are making that choice towards the light or towards darkness. And if enough people are able to really change the focus, then we could go towards the light. But if we choose to go towards the darkness, then, you know, that's what's going to happen. Because moment to moment, we're making the karma for that. So basically, no, I don't think that in Buddhism sees us as... each one is responsible for their own evolution and for helping others to also evolve. But of course, eventually we all will attain Buddhahood. So that's a good thing. How long it takes is not being said. You know, eons and eons probably. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I don't see any signs of it. Yes, people are interested, but they're also pretty complacent. That hunger for transformation, on the whole, is not there. People, they want to be transformed, but, you know, not beyond their comfort zone. One time somebody asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama, what's the quickest, easiest way for enlightenment? Must have been American. And His Holiness looked at him. Then he put his head down and he burst into tears. And he said, every morning I pray that for as long as sentient beings exist, for that long, I will come back again and again and again until samsara is emptied. I think it's going to take a bit of time. Thank you.